consisting of a wraparound screen, simulator base, and several special effects. Is it a bad system or just its execution? Well, initially debuting to much fanfare back in 2010 to much success, King Kong 360 was a great addition to the studio tour. However, that is just that, the studio tour, a much bigger attraction in which Kong 360 was just a small part of it, an exciting finale to it. However, this edition will be still popular enough to warrant a second edition to it, with this being Fast and Furious Supercharge, another version of the same similar system built in a separate location, bringing two of these similar attractions to the studio tour. However, this version would be less well received by guests. However, that didn't stop Universal from building them in the Universal Orlando Park, this time not part of a bigger attraction, but rather two smaller standalone experiences. A story that resulted in one great success and the other being a failure in which guests want the ride closed.
Oh boy.
But where did Universal go so wrong with this attraction, and how on one side did they succeed and the other they messed up so badly? Kong 360 immersed guests in the world of Skull Island, specifically the jungle section, in which they would find themselves caught in the crosshairs with Kong and some of its creatures of the island, in which they would battle it out in an exciting match between the two parties. An exciting adventure that can be done only on screens due to its high kinetic energy, as while you could do it physically, doing such in a way would cost drastically more, as well as take up a much larger footprint. And as a result, the screens with the simulator was the best option for it, and this does seem to be the case with high guest reception to the attraction despite its screen-based nature, due in part to this positive reception to the ride, as well as to help increase the return on investment from the first addition to it. Universal decided to clone the attraction and bring it over to Islands of Adventure over at the Universal Orlando Resort. However, they wouldn't just clone the ride, but rather drastically expand upon it with a massive new facade and several other additions to the ride to really help flesh out the concept and make it its own standalone attraction. The first of these areas was the facade in Q, in which the facade of Hollywood's version was drastically expanded upon to help maximize on that footprint of the Islands of Adventure version, as well as drastically add to the nearby land and atmosphere to it, with such facade being a beautiful Skull Island mountain accompanied by a massive gate that would open, in which trucks would find themselves going on a short road into the Skull Island cave, a road that could be bypassed in the case of bad weather to help increase the ride's operating capacity overall, as it would not have to shut down due to bad weather. Likewise, another notable addition to the Florida version was that the queue itself leading up to the ride, as unlike the studio tour, in which it was a more generic studio tour queue leading up to this general experience, Universal would drastically theme this queue to Skull Island, as that was the only attraction that guests would be boarding up to ride, and during this queue they would find themselves in highly immersive queues filled with animatronics, as well as some scare actors and scares along the way to really help set up the vibe, although these scare actors would unfortunately be cut down the road due in part to guest feedback. However, you can still find some digital scare actors spread amongst the queue itself to really help immerse you and set up the story and vibe for the ride that you are about to board. Speaking of this ride, to also help increase the re-rideability to it, there are several different narrators or your tour guides along the way to help spice up the ride narration, as well as help encourage you to ride the ride multiple times.
My name is Kalala, which means Royal One. It was my people who built the wall, and who once worshipped the mighty creature they called Kong.
By the way, my name's Frank, but most people around here just call me Jinx, because I've had my share of bum luck. And before you ask, yeah, I heard about it, but I ain't seen no giant ape. Let's try to keep it that way.
Team 1, this is Base. Doc, are you en route with the replacements and supplies for Team 2?
Heading there now, Millie. Team 2's waiting, so I'm taking you directly in the main cave system. You better put those goggles on now. We never know what's flying around inside the caves.
Name's Becky, West Texas born and bred, which means you greenhorns
adventure movies. That's what I want to do someday. I can't wait to tell them about this place.
Likewise, some other noticeable additions to the ride story and path to really help flesh out this concept of the attraction was a cave section before the first main scene that would be a screen-based one, with this cave section consisting of animatronic bats and general set aesthetics to really help further sell the aesthetic and vibe of the ride. Likewise, once you hit the first scene of the ride, you'll find themselves on the screen, but this screen is not the same screen media shown in the Hollywood version, but rather a story to help set up the rest of the ride, in which one of the tour's friends unfortunately gets stuck up in the middle of Skull Island, being under attack by some of its creatures, in which you'll follow this story before eventually being led into that main chase scene on another set of screens that is the exact duplicate of the Hollywood version, outside of some minor changes to help make it fit more thematically into the land, switching out the studio tour train media during the one section of the scene in which it gets swatted away by some creatures and off a cliff by one that matches your vehicle. Another benefit that the Islands of Adventure version received was that it was built on a former expansion plot, an area that was able to be drastically fleshed out and expanded upon as a result, and did not have to replace any additional rides or deal with any existing infrastructure problems like Supercharged would. That said, while most guest reception was positive, there was still a more positive mixed bag towards it when it came to adding the ride to the park. For instance, while some did see the Kong Mountain facade makes for a nice backdrop in Jurassic Park, others understand why they put the Kong ride where it is now, but part of them are still disappointed that we didn't get another Jurassic Park ride there instead. And quite frankly, it is a little disappointing that we didn't get to see the Jurassic Park area really expanded upon with another addition or ride. As shown in several of the other parks around the world, that Universal continues to deliver constantly when it comes to Jurassic Park in Jurassic World. However, ultimately, I do think it's the best to go with a new, unique option. As well, I would have loved some of the blue sky concept arts, like a helicopter ride through Jurassic Park. I think ultimately going with Skull Island was the best move, as it brought in a new IP that, while it fit, was different from the existing Jurassic Park one, and as a result, brought in a new fandom as well to the park, and gave guests another reason to go and visit that park beyond just an additional ride. Speaking of ways that Universal would continue to increase the draw of Skull Island, one of them was building on more physical areas of the ride so it wasn't just a screen-based ride, as after the main chase scene shown in the Hollywood version, guests would find themselves in more of the jungle aesthetic, as well as a massive King Kong animatronic, in which due to the forced perspective, you would just see its head as well as some of its shoulders, helping Universal save the money and space from building a full-fledged animatronic of the figure, but still giving that sense that you really are in its presence. The end result was a stunning, thrilling, and great expansion upon the story of the initial version that debuted in Hollywood, and at the same time was a great addition to Islands of Adventure. As a result of this ride's success, Universal decided to bring the same similar attraction or a similar version to it, as we'll see, over to the Universal Studios Park located right next door. While some may think that the same type of experience could not work as they are a very similar type of ride, as shown with Spider-Man as well as Transformers, Universal can have both successful attractions even if they utilize the same type of ride system. However, the execution is ultimately what matters, and unfortunately, when it comes to Fast and Furious Supercharged, the execution was not there, as all the beautiful pluses and additions that Islands of Adventure saw with their Skull Island variant, they did not get the same type of love and treatment when it came to Supercharged, an attraction that, to add insult to injury, took over the space of two former attractions. This was a stage show called Beetlejuice Rock and Roll Graveyard Review. As well as Disaster, which was a special effects show that took over a portion of the studio tour over at Universal Studios Hollywood known as Earthquake and drastically expanded upon it with an elaborate pre-show area in which guests got to participate and immerse themselves into that studio aspect of the park. meaning that Universal lost 50 minutes of attraction showtime in its parks and replaced it with a shorter and worse alternative. Likewise, unlike Skull Island Reighn of Kong, which has some beautiful kinetic energy aspects to it outside of it, this show building did not have such aspects, and you could not see the ride from the outside. Instead, you get that massive, ugly show building. In comparison to this, Fast and Furious definitely feels like a shoehorned in version of the ride that only exists to improve the return on investment for the company instead of a natural made fit, which really is a shame, as Universal Creative have shown in the past that they can drastically improve upon the story or facade of a ride to really help make it part of the actual attraction, even if you are just trying to increase their return on investment, with some great instances of this being the Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man existing at Marvel's Superhero Island and previously existing in the New York section as well over at Universal Studios Japan. In addition to this, there's also other examples like Transformers, in which the facade of the attraction was drastically adjusted and fit to really help make it feel like it deserved a spot in that placement of the park instead of just feeling out of place. As for why you're here, you are here for a party for some reason. This is a very weird and unusual reasoning. In addition to this, you have to think this is the studio's park. There's so many great opportunities that Universal could have extended upon the scene to really make it a home run hit, even if they did keep the same majority of the ride for its major show scene parts that are screen based. For instance, if we were to look at other attractions, they've done some great and unique twists to them to really help emphasize that studio theme, as well as make for some unique and exciting experiences. For instance, E.T.'s Adventure took guests onto the sets of E.T., and then you were recruited to be an extra as well as cast in an own story to help bring E.T. back to its home planet. Meanwhile, Revenge of the Mummy takes you onto the set of The Mummy from backstage into the actual production area and explores the legend of that character, only to find out that the mummy is indeed real and he's coming after your souls. But yeah, it's definitely a sign of how shoehorned in this ride was to the park. In general, it is a way worse fit than Skull Island Reighn of Kong was, which was a beautiful addition to the Jurassic Park area, really helping bring a new property but also drastically expanding and matching the existing environment to really provide that nice beautiful transition over from Toon Lagoon into Jurassic Park. Going back to Supercharged, it's not just guests that hate the ride and theme park fans as a whole, as outside of them being extremely vocal about their hate for the attraction, creatives behind Supercharged have also spoken out on the ride. For instance, Universal Creative Chief Creative Officer Terry Cope publicly expressed his regret over the creation of Fast and Furious Supercharge at IAPA in 2021, in which he stated, "I wish I had stopped senior management from building the Fast and Furious attraction." This comment also brings up another valid point, as corporate really wanted to push that synergy between products and really have this high-performing IP in the theater and bring it into its parks, and didn't really stop to think of the how and why behind it and the best way to utilize the property inside of its parks. And as a result, instead of building a Fast and Furious ride that was extremely fast and thrilling, Universal built a simulator that left guests seated and rocking back and forth while being blasted with loud music, smoke, and wind, to help set up the story, as well as convince guests to why they're boarding a party bus and introduce them into the characters that they're about to witness. Universal has 2 pre-shows, and while these are pretty bad and corny, as well as really unnecessary, as such story was set up via the screens in the ride vehicle leading up to the main screens, at least it's better than just standing in a line. Go help out and distract the FBI before finding yourself in the Fast and Furious shenanigans that go and unfold before you. It's some terrible CGI that drastically needs updating, although I'd rather them just close the whole ride as a whole, something that they did eventually do over at Universal Studios Hollywood 10 years after its debut to make way for a new attraction. As well as the attraction is not known at the moment, it could be a simple re-theme of the existing screen media or a drastic overhaul of the existing area to really expand upon the park, and such additions are still waiting to be seen, but both have some great opportunities. As a re-theme of the existing screen-based setup can be done for various different franchises and properties. Before going into some ways that Universal could do something similar for Fast and Furious Supercharge, another important thing to note is that both E.T. and Revenge of the Mummy did something great that was not considered when it came to Supercharged. And this is that the action and story is already set up by the time you are boarding the ride vehicle, and as a result, there is no time needed to spend time once you're aboard the actual ride vehicle to further help set up the story, something that Supercharged does very poorly, as once you're on the actual ride vehicle, most of the first half of the ride is just you sitting in that party room, as well as setting up more story about why you're going to this climactic chase. In addition to this, you already had to sit through 2 pre-shows, both of which did not have any of the popular characters shown in real life, but rather portrayed through just random actors and actresses that create a random character that fans of the franchise take little interest in. But hey, at least we're family.
Family. Our family.
What family? It's a family!
Family.
It's us, guys.
And to make it worse, unlike the Hollywood version of Supercharged, this attraction does not have any 3D glasses, despite the ride building being designed for it, but rather these 3D glasses were instead cut for budgetary reasons, and the ride itself is just shown in 2D. And unfortunately, this does seem to be a concerning issue when it comes to 3D attractions, with a lot of companies often opting to eventually cut the 3D aspect of the ride and just show a 2D version to help save on costs. It does continue to plague several editions, including Skull Island Reighn of Kong, which did initially debut with 3D glasses that really helped it stand out some more in comparison to Supercharged, but has unfortunately been cut along with Minion Mayhem to provide a cheaper experience for Universal to run. Speaking of the 3D nature of these attractions, it is unfortunately a dying cause in theme parks, as while they were once a novel and innovative way to portray and immerse guests inside their favorite media, over time the cost to implement these media and simulators into one's park has drastically declined, and as a result, the number of them drastically increased around the world, including sometimes having a 40-seater pop up in your local zoo or movie theater. As a result, guests were no longer as interested and wanted something more when they go and spend the money to visit a theme park, with most guests wanting to prefer that physical aspect of a ride and not have it just be a screen-based thing that you could see when you're at home. In addition to this, if a guest were to sit down and watch a 3D or 4D film, it is important that the film that they are watching is extremely interesting and exciting, and unfortunately Supercharged does not have this, which just adds insult to injury. As if this matter wasn't bad enough, Universal really hurt themselves in the foot, as well as other theme parks that invest in really immersive facades, as well as can do wonders for a park if the screen-based media is extremely exciting. Other times it can really hurt them, as it's a lot harder to switch out the media for new media, as unlike one's local theater, which could offer a 4D film, it could be easily switched out with whatever new movie that's showing. Universal would have a harder time doing this, as outside of the cost to implement new media, where a movie theater would simply already have a new movie given to them to go and portray in 4D, Universal would need to go and create that new media. In addition to this, they would also need to drastically improve upon the facade to make it fit even better, something that they did eventually learn their lesson on when it came to Shrek 4D's replacement over at Universal Studios Hollywood, a theater that, while it still shows the initial debut of the Kung Fu Panda film, could be easily switched out for different media based on DreamWorks properties. Going back to Florida's version of the Supercharged attraction, unlike Skull Island Reighn of Kong, which was a beautiful addition to the story and expanding upon this ride with its own unique sets, scenery, as well as some new screen-based media to it, Supercharged in Universal Studios Florida is just the same as Supercharged over at Universal Studios Hollywood. No additional scenes, nothing, in which you'll find yourselves blasted with loud music, smoke, water, and more, into a ride experience that you wish would end soon. A ride experience I've done once and have no plans on riding ever again due to just how bad the ride experience is. And to make it worse, unlike Skull Island Reighn of Kong, there is no 3D glasses, as these were instead cut for budgetary reasons. Another dangerous red flag when it comes to screen-based rides, it continues to hit other areas of Universal attractions as well, as Universal is able to cut the cost of them down the road, as such classes can be expensive to replace, so why spend the money if you can just cut them as a whole? While a permanent closure for Supercharged over at the Universal Florida Park has yet to be announced, the ride does see some seasonal closures to or all of the attraction, with part of it being used for Halloween Horror Nights. While it remains unclear of how Universal Creative could mess up such a ride concept and not learn upon the lessons of why Skull Island Reighn of Kong worked so well as a standalone attraction and simply tried to take the cheap route when it came to bringing Supercharged to their Florida park, it ultimately came down to hurt them in the butt, with such a ride not being nearly as popular as Skull Island Reighn of Kong, with sometimes barely having a wait at all. Meanwhile, Reighn of Kong continues to draw in crowds today, several years after its initial debut back in 2016. As for a more permanent replacement to it, given the overall decline in screen-based media in the parks and Universal's more focus on that physical media aspect of the ride, plus rumors swirling of Fast and Furious being seen as the brand new roller coaster replacing Bright Rocket, as while I would love to see Ghostbusters get that scene instead, Fast and Furious does seem to unfortunately be the leading rumor into it. And if this ride were to debut as a coaster, we would likely see the closure of Supercharged follow, leading up to the coaster's debut, something that saw a similar fate over at Universal Studios Hollywood. As for a replacement to Supercharged, the screen-based media option is a good fit as they wanted to go that route. However, I could also see Universal wanting to take a different route entirely due to the overall decline in screen-based media in its park in return for more physical and entertaining attraction offerings. When it comes to why Universal could opt to keep the existing screen-based media format into its park, is that it already has all of the existing infrastructure to do so and would require minimal changes than just changing the facade. As a result, all Universal would need to do is just create new media as well as adjust the coding for the similar base to quickly debut a new ride in its place. And this is a strategy that they have done before, with Hanna-Barbera eventually being switched over to Jimmy Neutron, and Jimmy Neutron then becoming the Minions down the road. In addition to this, Universal may want a really quick turnaround for this case, even if it does mean spending an extra money on a 4D attraction that some guests won't like due to the screen-based media being shown on it. This is because Universal Studios Florida is in a current state of a drastic overhaul, with some major capacity areas being down and soon to be down, with Bright Rocket closing and likely opening up in 2027 to 2028 to make way for a new coaster. In addition to this, in 2027, The Simpsons will likely be closing as their licensing deal expires if it is not extended, in which the whole land would also require the area to be closed, continuing to drastically hurt the existing capacity of the park, not to mention any existing rides that could require a major overhaul and refurbishment to them. Another strategy that Universal is implementing into its parks, with rides like Revenge of the Mummy and soon-to-be Jurassic Park getting that treatment and love. However, I could also see Universal going a different route entirely, drastically improving upon the attraction and replacing that screen-based media simulator ride with a more physical and attractive ride offering. As an idea for such a replacement could be Mack Ride's new and innovative rocking boat system, a system that first debuted over in Futurescope with Mission Bermuda and will be used in Dollywood's next attraction debuting in 2026 called Night Flight Expedition, which would be the only operating version of the ride in the United States. And I could see Universal wanting to capitalize upon this ride's rarity of the system, as well as bringing upon a classic that many fans are asking for, with this being Jaws, as such a ride system would be a great way to incorporate the popular and iconic IP and give it new life into the park, as well as bring back the former attraction in a way that requires a lot less space and can be done on a much smaller scale and budget, as well as easier to maintain. In fact, if you were to overlay Mission Bermuda onto this Supercharged plot land, it would fit almost perfectly. Likewise, all you would need to do is close the existing San Francisco's candy shop and make the add its queue, and by having a bridge go over the existing streetway, Universal is able to expand the footprint of the ride and drastically improve upon the popularity of the San Francisco area. Regardless though of if Supercharged will be replaced by a screen-based or physical version to the ride, one thing to keep in mind is the important nature of more action-based scenes to help guests continue to be excited when they're inside of the show building. For instance, if we were to compare Island Reighn of Kong over to Fast and Furious Supercharge, you can tell there's a drastic difference in the overall variety of the screens, as well as providing a way more action-packed narrative when it came to Island Reighn of Kong, unlike Supercharge, which was a much smaller portion of the ride itself. Until then, we are unfortunately stuck with the subpar, similar screen-based ride in the park. But one silver lining behind it all is Universal's desire to continue to grow, learn, and innovate. This is a strategy that continues to play out today in its parks and just continues to do so to great success, as seen recently with Epic Universe, who debuted with several new innovative ride systems and others that improved upon the former ones, to just expand upon the ride experience and debuting new ones that continue to wow guests in ways never done before.